campaign season now, you're listening to all the candidates, right?
Right.
That's your due diligence. I think I tell you, it is very profound to be part of this process. One of the things that you really feel it. You feel it in Iowa, and you feel it in Nevada, and you feel it in New Hampshire, and you feel it in South Carolina, and that's that you guys know how important the decision is that you'll make, and you realize that this decision could be consequential for the world. I think particularly this year, there's a sense, we've been saying for a long time, this is the most important election in our lifetime, because a few of them have been. This is one of the most important elections in American history. I'm not running against anyone. Could I have some water, please?
Yes, it's right on the table.
Thank you.
Do
You want me to use the mic? Is this better if I use the mic?
Yeah.
Better for you? Okay.
It is for Facebook.
I'm not running against anyone. I'm running with a lot of really good people. I respect that you're listening to all of us. That's your job. I feel very privileged and honored that I have this opportunity to tell you about myself and how I see America. This is one long job interview, and I want to tell you how I see things and what I would do if you make me president. The way I see things, our problems did not begin with Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump created all these problems. I think all these problems created Donald Trump. And I think that we let this happen. And I say we in a big sense because America has been sliding away from our own democratic ideals for 40 years now. And we've been sliding away from our democratic ideals because we have allowed our government to become handmaiden to an authoritarian corporate order. Now, that corporate order began with an economic theory, which was well-intentioned enough by the people who first articulated it. It came out of a Chicago school, University of Chicago. A man named Milton Friedman was the main articulator of this idea of trickle-down economics. But I want to say something about this because these were not bad people. One of the things that when I talked to you about what trickle-down economics did, he himself said there needed, fascinatingly enough to me, he himself said we need to have a universal basic income. Because in order to make trickle-down economic theory safe in his mind, we needed to have that. But the people who took the idea and promulgated it in political terms left out that part. Now, I see some people here who are young, who wouldn't remember this, and I don't want to whitewash or romanticize American capitalism or American government before the 1980s, but some things were different. And believe it or not, to the youngins in the room, before 1980, you might not believe this, kids, the American corporation was actually expected to care.
Yeah.
And so, if somebody had worked there for decades, it was an understanding, it was the ethical glue that held our country together. Well, of course, the corporation would care that they had a dignified retirement.
Right.
And when those ethical principles that are just form the underpinning of our social understanding and agreement become eroded, you're in trouble. And we're in trouble. And your doctor is going to take some tests, and you expect the doctor to be honest with you. Because if the doctor's not honest with you and the test results aren't so good, how are you going to come together and say, well, what are my options and what are we going to do? But we have a political system that actually doesn't talk honestly about what's happened, because they're the ones who allow it to happen. And so once this idea became in vogue, the idea that all that a corporation owed was financial, fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders. Now before that, it was its stockholders, its workers, the environment, the community, or at least some semblance thereof. But with trickle-down economics, the idea was, no, all that owe is fiduciary responsibility to their stockholders, even if it was at the expense of the worker. In fact, even if it was at the expense of the worker, the community, the environment. For instance, just as an example, before the 1980s, a CEO could not be paid in stock options. Now just think about that. It's just an example. The CEO could be paid in stock options. Why? Because once the CEO could be paid in stock options, then the CEO has an inherent conflict of interest. If I serve the workers and treat the workers better, I'm going to get less money at the end of the day. Another example of this is before the 1980s, big pharmaceutical companies could not advertise on television. Right. Because it was considered not good for people. All that went out the window in the 1980s. Deregulate, that the bottom line should be whatever increases the ability of the corporation to make money. Now, the idea that was sold to us was that this was going to be good for everyone. Because all this money would be made by the stockholders, and they would create so many jobs that the money would trickle down and lift all boats. Some of us are old enough. I don't think you're old enough, but you know the history. That we're nodding like, yeah, we heard all that. After 40 years, the jury's in. It so did not lift all boats. It has left millions of people without even a life vest. Yep. It has destroyed America's middle class. Yep. It has caused a huge, massive transfer of wealth into the hands of 1% of our people who now own more wealth than the bottom 90%. And no, the money is not spent on job creation, or a lot of it's spent on job creation overseas, and so forth and so forth. There's been an assault on labor that came through all this, because anything that increases the welfare of the worker decreases the economic gain of the stockholder. Although, in long term, that's not even true. Because happy employers are good for business, and employees are good for business, but that's long term. And that system doesn't think long term. Now, and this economic bottom line corrupted American capitalism. Now, I consider myself a capitalist. I have no problem saying I'm a capitalist. But this is a virulent strain of capitalism. Because all institutions, public as well as personal, should be dictated by conscience. Capitalism should have a conscience. How a company treats a person. A company should have a conscience. Public policy should have a conscience. The average American is a good person. I think the average American, in my experience, does care. We say to each other all the time, do you think I did the right thing? Do you think that was the right thing to do? That's what we do as people. The problem is not with the average American and where we live within ourselves. It's that we have stopped applying just the basic laws of common decency that we certainly apply to our individual lives to public policy, like that's something different. But all that public policy is our collective behavior. And in a representative democracy, the government is supposed to be representing the will of the people. Well, we've already said the will of the people is that we're decent. The government in America today does not represent the will of the people. So much as it represents the will of huge multinational corporate interests, whose will is short-term economic gain for its stockholders, even if it's at the expense of the people that the government is supposedly representing. Why is that? Well, in the 80s was when this whole trickle-down economic nonsense started. Then in the 90s, money in politics started big time. I mean, it was there before, but then it became really big. And then the Supreme Court said that money is free speech. And then this all climaxed, of course, a few years ago in the Citizens United decision, so that now corporations have unlimited power to dominate our elections. We are not a functioning democracy.
Right. No.
Our government has moved from Lincoln's comment on a government of the people, by the people, for the people, to a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, for a few of the people, a government of huge multinational corporate interests, by huge multinational corporate interests, and for huge multinational corporate interests. But we're looking to the governmental establishment that created this to somehow repair this. Mm-hmm. Are we fools? That's really the question. And it's a question in this election. Because a political status quo perpetuates itself. A political status quo does not disrupt itself. Now, when the abolitionists led to the abolition of slavery, and the women's suffragettes led to the 19th Amendment and the overthrow of institutionalized suppression of women, and the civil rights movement led to the end of segregation, none of those things happened because the government woke up one day and said, let's get rid of slavery. They didn't happen because the government woke up one day and said, oh, let's give women the right to vote, why not? The government didn't wake up one day and say, let's desegregate. With the abolitionist movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. With the women's suffrage movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. With the civil rights movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. I'm running for president because it's time once again. It's time for the people to step up, the people to rise up. So of course, the system which drove us into this ditch says that anybody who's not in that system is unqualified to drive us out of the ditch. Of course they do. Of course they do. That's how the system operates. This is not about individuals, and it's certainly not about the candidates. It's about the larger system. Now, even if, listen, I'm a Democrat, and I'm even beyond being a Democrat, I am very committed to Donald Trump no longer being president next year. Okay. That's a given. But if all we do, if all we think about is we just need to defeat him, we need to defeat him, we need to defeat him, if that's all we do, these forces will be back in 22. And they will be back in 24. Just defeating Donald Trump next year, we have a bigger job. I'm not saying we don't have that job to do. We have a bigger job to do. Donald Trump is the symptom. We need to address the cause. We need a fundamental disruption of what has become a corporate aristocracy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we said no to that in 1776. It's time to say no to it again. Hundreds of years ago, it was landed gentry in big houses in the countryside of England. Today, it's big pharmaceutical companies, and it's health insurance companies, and it's gun manufacturers, and it's chemical companies, and it's food companies, and it's oil and gas companies, and it's defense contractors, and it's agribusiness. Mm-hmm. Even if it means contaminants in our water. Yep. Even if it means carcinogens in our food. Even if it means toxins in our air. Even if it means pesticides for sale that we know do harm to a child's brain, developing child's brain. Even if it means the desecration of our planet. Even if it means a perpetual war machine that doesn't seem to have anything built into it having to do with how are we going to create peace as well as be prepared for war. We have moved, ladies and gentlemen, from dysfunction to malfunction, I'm afraid. Now, if you have a friend who is someone who drinks too much or someone who takes drugs too much, we're living in modern America. We all know what that means. And most of us have either received a phone call or made a phone call, in which somebody says to somebody, you think we ought to do something? Did you see her last night at the party? Yeah, I was there. Did you see she couldn't even walk to the car? Did you see that? Yeah, I saw it. Was anybody else there? Yeah, I think her brother was there. Do you think we ought to call him? Now, when I have either made that call or had someone else make that call, I've noticed how it's always everybody was getting it at the same time. Her mother was feeling it, and her brother was feeling it, right? And her boyfriend was feeling it. Everybody kind of knows it's time. Does anybody know an interventionist? Why? Because we all know there's a level past which you cannot go. The physical survival of the body is not guaranteed. You take drugs too much, you might overdose. You drink too much, you might die. And everybody, it's a gut call, isn't it? It's interesting how everybody starts feeling it at the same time. like this is going too far. Because we know that the survival of the physical body cannot be guaranteed. We're not stupid. It's time for us to awaken from our magical thinking. The survival of our democracy cannot be guaranteed either. And the survival of this species cannot be guaranteed. Part of the problem is that the political establishment has decided that in order to win elections, the best thing to do is to talk to us like we're 14 years old. We're not even talked to like we're intelligent adults. And yet, if ever there was a time in American history where we really need to be intelligent adults now, we really need to be deep thinkers now. I don't care who you are. If you're 18, I think we should lower the voting age to 17, by the way. But I don't care if you're 18 or you're 80, we all need to put our head together and we need to be deep thinkers now. And another thing that the political establishment does, it talks to us like we're children. It's turned us into spectators. But it also assumes that you only care about yourself. Ooh, you're older, I'm going to talk to you about Social Security. Ooh, you're black, I'm going to talk to you about mass incarceration. Ooh, you're a woman, I'm going to talk to you about pay equity. Ooh, you're gay, I'm going to talk to you about transgender rights. All of which are important, don't get me wrong. But right now, I want to talk to you as an American. Because you're Jewish and you're American, you're black and you're American, you're gay and you're American, you're woman and you're American. We all have to talk right now as Americans. And we are not children, and we are a noble people. So I don't want to just talk to you about what you might want, because none of us will gain if we don't correct this basic rupture that has occurred in America between our decency and the way our government behaves. This is a threat to our democracy, and that is the task that stands before us. Now, I've had a 35-year career working with people who are living in times of crisis. And what I've learned is that there are certain principles. And if you apply those principles, things change. And something I've already mentioned is that people are smart. So it's my experience when people hear the bad news, the test results came back, they're not good, my child's addicted, it's heroin, my spouse is gone, it's over, my business has tanked. What I have seen over and over again is that that's when people get their smartest. You know, because you hear really bad news and all these unimportant things that we allow to preoccupy us just fall away in the first 5 minutes. And you look at the doctor real seriously, tell me everything. That's the place where we go. And that's who we are. We are smart people. We are not people who can't handle the truth. But we are talked to as though we can't handle the truth, because it is better for those who are trying to get our vote if they don't necessarily tell us the truth. Because number one, they're afraid you might find them negative, and number two, you might figure out that they're the ones who created the problem. So, number one, we have to repeal the 2017 tax cut.
Yes.
It's a $2 trillion tax cut, where 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest individuals and corporations, and there is no evidence anywhere that it will ever even pay for itself, much less stimulate the economy. It is absolutely a continuation of the massive transfer of wealth into the hands of that 1%. We should put back in the middle class tax cut, because that was a good idea. It should have been there before. We should stop the corporate subsidies.
Yes.
$26 billion last year alone for oil and gas. Like they needed the money.
Yeah.
Right? Then another one, which is a big giveaway to corporate America, is the way the United States has outlawed its own government from being able to negotiate for lower drug prices with big pharmaceutical companies, even though there are people in America dying because they don't have insulin. Another unbelievably obscene giveaway is our military establishment. Now, this is not a critique of the military. My father fought in World War II. I have a lot of respect. We all know we need a strong military. Nobody's arguing with that. But anybody who thinks that our military budget is just a reflection of what the military says they need, is someone who is not looking at what's happening now. So I believe that the military should get every dollar that they say they need for legitimate security purposes. But you know, there are hundreds of billions of dollars on top of what they say they need, which is just short-term profits for military and defense contracts.
Absolutely.
And then I agree that we should say 3% to billionaires who made their money righteously. I think we're all happy for them, or we're envious of them. And I also think that they should pay 3% tax on their assets. And I don't think we have to feel bad about that, because they will not feel it. And I think we should say to people who have over $50 million that we're happy for you too, if you made it righteously, but we would like 2% on those assets. Now, what's going to happen when we do those things? We're going to have some cash on hand. And I'll tell you what we're going to do with that cash if you make me president. First of all, to me, the greatest moral breach. I'm not talking about private morality. Private morality, I don't think the government should have any say in what people do. I'm talking about public morality. I'm talking about the ethics of our public policy. And no place, to me, is more of a breach between our decency and the way we operate than in the fact that millions of American children live with chronic trauma. We are not even looking at this. This is a huge sea of unnecessary suffering and trauma. We have 13 million hungry children in the United States of America. We have 100,000 homeless children in the United States of America. We have millions of children who go to schools in classrooms where they do not have the adequate school supplies to teach a child to read. And what does that mean? Well, if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, then the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. This is why they call it a cradle to prison pipeline. We have millions of American children who experience, because not only of they're living in what's now called the domestic war zone, so much violence in their communities and their families, but now with every school shooting, what American child does not deal with this every day, wondering, is this going to be the day when I might get shot at school? It is so outrageous. And the teachers, so every teacher lives with that. Every parent who drops their child off at school. And why? So that gun manufacturers can have their profits. The American child, we have children who are traumatized before preschool. The PTSD of millions of these children, psychologists tell us, is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq. You know how many mental health counselors we have for in our schools? One for every 1,500 children. So I want a massive, so please hear me, because if you make me president, I don't want you to act all surprised later. I'm telling you now. Massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. Yeah. I want a United States Department of Children and Youth. You see, when our economic system was invented, women didn't even have a voice in the public sphere, and taking care of children was just seen as women's work. Well, we're here now, and we need a mother in the White House. We need community wraparound services. We need trauma-informed education. We need nutritional and mental counseling, not only for the children, but also for their families. We need restorative justice. We need conflict resolution. We need mindfulness in the schools. And we need to end once and for all the practice by which we base our educational funding primarily on property taxes. It is to withhold a high-quality public school education from any child. Much less because that child didn't win the birth lottery when it comes to the money of that child's parents, is a passive form of oppression. So hear me now, because I don't want you to tell me later, but you didn't tell me. No, I'm telling you now. I want every school in America, and I think all of us in our hearts want this, every school in America should be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. Every school in America. Yeah. Some people would say we can't afford it.
Yeah.
Now, can we talk about this for a minute? How many millions, billions, possibly trillions of dollars do we not realize in economic potential simply by not mining the gold of the genius that is potential within the brain of every child? There is nothing in the wind, there's nothing in the sun, there's nothing underneath the ground that can begin to fuel the 21st century that we want, like the brains of our children. And we know things now that they didn't even know 50 years ago about the neuroplasticity and all the stuff that goes on in a child's brain. They didn't, I mean, that's where our gold is. You want an amazing economy 10 years from now? I'll tell you what you do. Take better care of your 10-year-olds today. And so I want a Department of Children and Youth so that we can actually coordinate in regard to all the extraordinary challenges and vulnerabilities of the American child. Second thing we need to face, because this is all about looking in the mirror, it's all about facing that dark underbelly. That's number one, that we're letting this happen to our children. Because you see, all that our political establishment is doing around these children is normalizing their despair.
Yes.
That's all. Their despair has been normalized. And you know what? Listen, I've been down to Homestead in Florida. I understand about the children at the border. This is not in any way to minimize that. If I'm president, I will hold accountable every single person that had to do with those draconian policies. However, I have to tell you though, why haven't we been talking about these millions of children who are already there? And can we talk about it? Because there are no votes in those kids. See, they're not old enough to vote, they're not a constituency, they're not old enough to work, so there's no financial leverage. So how are they going to compete with the corporate class? See, this is what I mean. The people have to step in now.
Yeah.
Second has to do with what we have to look at in terms of climate change. Just another place where we have a hard time, just like in the first one. Why do we have a hard time? Well, we have a hard time because of oil and gas and all the other polluters and chemicals, etc. Jimmy Carter, some of us remember, he said we need to go green in 1976. He put solar panels on top of the White House. First thing Ronald Reagan did was to take the solar panels off, because we know whose guy he was.
Yeah.
Right? We have 12 years. We have to be radical in the next 12 years. We have to have a World War II level mass mobilization to reverse climate change, and nothing less than that. We need to sequester the carbon, we need to reforest, we need to deal with animal factory farming, otherwise the nitrous oxide and the methane would get us even if we did everything else. We need to continue to invest in green energy, but we need to go full on, and there is so much that we can do. Somebody was telling me just earlier today about 14,000, there are 14,000 miles of high-speed trains in China. There is so much we can do to re-green our economy. There's so much we can do to build, but we need to go beyond the thought of a Green New Deal. We need to think in terms of a Green New Century, and the United States of America should be leading this. Americans are hardwired for big things. We're not hardwired for little things. That's why politics become so boring. Well, we're going to do a little bit here, we're going to do a little bit there, we can take 10% off there, we can reduce that by 90%, and your eyes kind of glaze over. We're Americans. We don't do small, we do big. We're like big airplanes, you know. You see them in the sky and they're awesome, and you see them on the runway and they're kind of clunky metal. You know, politics should be poetry. Politics should be this collective act of greatness. And small random acts of kindness will not be enough to turn this ship around. We need huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. That's what Americans are not tired because we're doing too much. On a certain level, we're tired because we're not doing enough. We do big things. Like we're going to make every school is going to be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. Well, you're going to make that happen in the next 4 or 8 years? Well, maybe not, but we're going to get started. We're going to make the whole century green. What is this? When have we become so trained to think little?
Yes.
Because we've been trained to think only of ourselves. And we've been trained to say pretty please. We need to remember who we are. It drives me nuts when I see the only rambunctiousness I see is on the side of Trump supporters. What happened to us? Why aren't we saying hell no? We should all be saying hell no. We should just be saying hell no to who they're saying hell yes to.
Yes. Yes.
Now, the next thing we need to do is what I was talking about before with our national security budget. Some of you, too young to know this, some of you are old enough to remember, we used to actually go to ban the bomb protests and things. They're so exhausted us, we don't even try anymore. We've been worn down. And young people, you don't even remember a time when the United States wasn't at war. That's what they do. See what they've done to us? It's kind of like when you, I've never been there, but I've certainly read about it. When people freeze to death, like on mountains, then they have to say, don't go to sleep, because if you go to sleep, that's when it happens. So we don't go to sleep. And I feel we ought to say to each other, don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep. We have a $760 billion military budget every year. We have a $40 billion State Department budget. And I want you, while I'm saying these things, to remember, this is your money. This is your money. This is the money that gets taken out of your taxes. This is your money. So I want you to know what you spend your money on. $760 billion for military every year. And like I said, that's hundreds of billions of dollars over what the military says they need. Okay? $40 billion on the State Department. State Department is long-term development and diplomacy and mediation. Now within that $40 billion, you spend $17 billion on something called the USAID, which is long-term development and humanitarian assistance. And then in addition to that, also within the $40 billion, less than $1 billion on what's called peace-building agencies. Now, liken it to healing your body. We now have a whole person, holistic, integrative attitude towards the body. You don't just take medicine, you have to cultivate health. Your diet matters, your exercise matters. You can't just not take care of your body, and then if you get sick, hope the doctor can fix it by suppressing or eradicating the symptoms. We don't look at it that way. You have to, because sickness is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of sickness. We have to look at war and peace the same way. War is just the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. What are we doing? Just hoping that will keep every possible adversary from getting a nuclear bomb. And I'm not saying we don't need to try to do that. Please don't get me wrong, whether it's Iran or North Korea or anyone else. But is that what we see for our grandkids? That we'll just be constantly trying to keep the next one from happening? I mean, it makes no sense. You're not going to just back your way into peace. We're not even admitting to ourselves how nihilistic we've become. We're not even admitting to ourselves how much we're just kind of waiting for everything to crash. And then those of us who are old enough, although it's interesting about age, I find this in myself, because if you're a certain age, you do the math, and you probably go, well, it probably won't happen while I'm still here. But at the same time, it's counterintuitive, because interestingly enough, you feel greater urgency, even though you won't probably be here, because it's just built into the species, and the older we get, we are elders, it's an archetype. And then you've got younger people. I think those of us who are older need to get, do you know how many younger people just are really talking very seriously though, about not having children? Yeah. Now it used to be just like really sort of radical vegans I knew, but not anymore. And I have a 29-year-old daughter. Now they take a look at the environment, they take a look at all of this. What is happening? And we're just kind of going on and on like this, and we're not even discussing. Politics should be where we're seriously discussing what's going on, not where we're not discussing what's going on. I want a Department of Peace. We should build up the peace-building agencies, because peace-building agencies are to war what diet and exercise is to health. We should have a peace academy as well as a military academy. So right now, what happens when the president meets with national security advisors? You've got all the people in suits and general suits, and they look so sophisticated, and they look so serious, and actually they are, and you are too, until you realize these are the people who took us into Iraq. And these are the people who took us into Iran. So let's wake up from this, oh, they're experienced politicians, so they know. Let's get over that, okay? Meanwhile, they're sitting there, and then on the side of the room, sitting there, like the second-class citizens, are the peace-building agencies. Now, let me tell you what the peace builders do, because these are specific skill sets and specific expertise. And this expertise is no less sophisticated than military expertise, and in some of the places where these things are practiced, just as courageous. There are 4 factors which, when present in any environment, statistically indicate there will be greater peace and there will be less conflict. And anybody in this room, if you thought about it, could figure out what they are. Number 1, greater economic opportunity for women. Number 2, greater educational opportunity for children. Number 3, reduction of violence against women. And number 4, just the amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
But where's the corporate profits there? See how corrupt this is? Just like with a profit-making healthcare system, there's more financial incentive in sickness than in health, which is why we need to change that. And with war and peace, there's more financial incentive for corporate interests in war than in peace. So all public policy, to me, whether it's domestic policy or international policy, should be built around one core principle, and that is what would help people thrive. That's where peace comes from. When people aren't desperate, people do desperate things. Desperate people also are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, whether it's gang membership or a terrorist organization. But also that's where money comes from. Money doesn't come from a bunch of crumbs dropped from the table of corporate aristocrats in the form of job creation. That's not where money comes from. And by the way, this is not personal, because not every rich person in America is a greedy bastard. Very, very, very wealthy people in America would agree with everything we're saying here. You know, no socioeconomic group has a monopoly on values or on conscience. I don't care if you're rich or you're poor, you're black or white or you're gay or whatever, people know something's going too far. Right. So we need a coalition of conscience now. It's not your group and then your group and your group. This is all of us as Americans. We have a ship that needs to be righted now. American capitalism must reclaim its conscience, and the U.S. government should be disconnected from its obscene, immoral, and undemocratic obeisance to the will of the capitalist system. Yeah. What we need to do is to know that money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. That's where money comes from. Money comes if any person in this room, so there are a few young people in this room. Those of us who are not young, let's think this through. If every person in this room who is young is really, if the space is created to the best of our ability, that the young people in this room have a chance to live their dreams, that's where money will come from. People living their dreams. That's why I want universal health care. That's why I want free college at state colleges and universities, and that's why I want the removal of the college loans. It's not charity. It's better for America because it unleashes the spirit of the American people. It uncaps the dreams of the American people. Right now you have tens of millions of people. You have 93 million people living in near poverty in the United States. So that means right there are 93 million people living with chronic economic anxiety. If you're living near poverty, that means in the back of your mind every single day, you don't know what would happen if you got sick. You don't know what would happen if one of your children got sick. You don't know how you're going to send your kids to college, and you don't know how you're going to ever get out of these college loans. That means millions of people who are at jobs that they don't really love, but they're just at that job because they need the benefits. Many young people starting careers that aren't really what they want, but they can't imagine doing what they really love and being able to pay off these college loans. So much tension, so much stress, so much anxiety. And then these politicians come around. We need to do something about the mental health care crisis. I shout at the television, I have an idea, guys. Stop driving everybody crazy. These things are not by accident. These are all the creations of bad public policy. The underpinnings of bad public policy. Public policy by which there has been this huge transfer of wealth. We need a season of repair. And it's, to be honest, the whole thing is probably a 20-year process. We are so off course, but we can get started. We can get started, we can make a difference, we can know that we're doing it, we're showing up as a generation. We're gonna right this ship, it has to be done carefully. We're gonna have to move from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We're gonna have to move from a war economy to a peace economy if we really want to get this country back on track. But this must be done tenderly, and it must be done with great respect, because there are thousands and thousands of people whose jobs are connected to dirty energy and whose jobs are created to defense, some of which is reasonable defense, but some of which is not. And it's not the economic argument, oh, they employed so many people. More money is made through investment in infrastructure and in education than is made through defense. So in this season of repair, our task is to end an aberrational chapter of American history and to begin a new one. Now I just want to say one more thing that I see as a pillar of this repair, and then I'll take questions and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. It is my career for 35 years has been, I work very up close and personal with people who are seeking to transform their lives, particularly during a time of crisis. That's what I do. And I have seen, and not only the effects of bad public policy, because, someone who does my kind of work, I'm sure there are other people here, therapists, clergy, whatever, we understand, things happen, people get sick, people die, people grieve, things happen. But what I've seen in the last 15 years is people going through hardship that they should not be going through in the richest country in the world. People who are doing everything right. People who got educated, but they can't get out from under these college loans. They work hard, but they still have to work more than one job a day. They come home and there's not enough energy to talk to their lover, to talk to their partner, to talk to their spouse, to read a book to their child. Everybody's just in this chronic state, and then we wonder why everybody's so sick, by the way. Stress is the biggest contributor to sickness. We really want to talk about health care. I don't want to be a president who just provides health care. I want to be a president who provides health. And in order to do that, we're going to have to recognize what the chemical companies are allowed to do, and what the food companies are allowed to do, and what every other agribusiness and everyone else who's contributing to contaminants, etc. So when we do this and we allow people to simply breathe and be happier, what's going to happen is that the natural forces of healing will happen. It will be one person at a time, one community at a time. But there's one issue. And what I have seen working up close and personal is that if you look in the mirror and you're willing to be honest and you're willing to, recognize where am I and where am I not who I say I am, where do I have to atone, where do I have to make amends, where do I have to make some changes, where do I have to rise to the occasion, then your life changes. All that a country is a collection of people. That's why I feel that I'd be a good president. I want to help America look in the mirror with tenderness, with compassion, because that's part of it. If you look in the mirror and you see things you don't like and you don't have compassion for yourself, then everything breaks down because you constrict. So we have to have compassion for ourselves. America hasn't done everything wrong. Some people in America today only want to talk about what we've done right, and they're in complete denial about what we've done wrong. Some people in America only want to talk about what we've done wrong, and they're in denial about all the things we've done right. We have to recognize we're people. And we want to get where America gets it right and extend that to our children. And where America's got it wrong, we want to break the chain. So there's this one issue. In AA, people are told to take a fearless moral inventory and admit the exact nature of their character defects. There's one character defect that's been with us from the beginning, and it's simply time to clean it up in the next way. And that's racism. It's been with us from the beginning, and it's time to start a new chapter. I don't think the average American is racist. That's not my experience or my belief. But I do feel like the average American is undereducated. and underinformed about the history of race. So when you actually look at it, the decent American goes, yeah. So the first slave ships were brought over in 1619. 1619. And slavery was not abolished in this country until 1865. That's 250 years, just shy of 250 years. At the end of the Civil War, historians believe there was anywhere between 4 and 5 million slaves. And Tecumseh Sherman promised 40 acres and a mule, we've all heard that, to every former slave family of 4. The promise was rescinded. And except for the 12 years at the end of Civil War called Reconstruction, where the federal troops were in the South to ensure that slavery would not be reinstituted, except for those 12 years, at the end of the Civil War, at the end of 250 years of slavery, there was another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people. I mean, what do you call lynching? What do you call Ku Klux Klan? It's domestic terrorism. And throughout the South, they passed what were called the Black Code laws to ensure subpar economic, social, and political opportunity for black people. Now, I was a child. I'm probably not the only person in the room remember, even though we were little. 100 years after the end of the Civil War, 1964, Martin Luther King, Civil Rights Movement, the U.S. Congress, Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act dismantled segregation. Good. And the next year, the Voting Rights Act, because the Voting Rights Act ensured that black people and all Americans would have equal access to the polls. All that was great, but it's time to do the next thing, because if I've been kicking you to the ground in 350 years of institutionalized violence against black people is kicking people to the ground, I owe you 2 things. 1, to stop kicking, and number 2, to say, here, let me help you get back up. And in some ways, we have to face this. We're sliding backwards.
Yes.
Mass incarceration, we're sliding backwards.
Yes.
Mandatory minimums in sentencing, we're sliding backwards. Racial disparity in criminal sentencing, we're sliding backwards. And now, since 2013, the John Roberts-led Supreme Court has been chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, so that now we have these voter suppression efforts all over the country.
Yep.
So Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II. Now that doesn't mean, the Holocaust didn't happen, but it's helped, it's gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. Yes. Because it happened and civilizations move on. There's a way in which we've never moved on as much as we might. Even though Germany, the Holocaust ended in 1945, this ended in 1865. One thing you can say about the generation, and it wasn't the generation that fought World War II, it was the generation after. So none of this like, well, I wasn't there. Because the generation of Germans that said, okay, we need to clean this up, we need to pay reparations, etc., was the children of. Okay? Were the children of. And you don't walk around Germany and feel the Holocaust guilt like you did 30 years ago. Because there's been this full-on, we did it, we admit we did it, let's atone, let's make amends. Once again, it doesn't mean it didn't happen, but that's what you do in life. That's why Catholics go to confession. That's why in the Jewish religion, the day of Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year, Day of Atonement. So, my plan, $500 billion to be dispersed over 20 years. And the money would be dispersed to a council called Reparations Council, black leaders, and the stipulation on the part of the United States government would be that the money is to be used for purposes of economic and educational renewal. Within that, whether it's for historical black colleges or home ownership by black people or investment capital in black businesses, whatever, it would not be white America's decision. That part of the moral power of reparations. If I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. Because we need to have more than economic restitution. We have to have a spiritual healing here. And everybody's talking about doing, understanding white privilege, etc., all of which is important. I've been leading ritualized prayers of apology to black people in my services for decades. But you know, at a certain point, if you owe me $1,000, I really appreciate the apology. I'd also like my money back. The apologies are important, the recognition of white privilege is important, and also it's time to pay up. We do not need another commission. We do not need to study this more. We do not need to have, no. It's time to have a plan and do this.
Yeah.
It's time to do this. It will be such a blessing on our children, our children's children. And also I want to say something else. It's an economic stimulus. You talk about, I'm talking about $500 billion, about a $2 trillion tax cut. That wasn't an economic stimulus. There was a study done recently that if black families were to make as much money as white families in America, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger.
Wow.
So this is going, you know, just like when Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Stimulation of opportunity anywhere is a stimulation of the economy everywhere. My whole health plan, which I will be revealing like in the next week or so, has as much to do with creating health as it has to do with treating sickness. It acknowledges all the ways that we need to address prevention of illness. It acknowledges all the ways in which Americans have a higher level of chronic illness than do people in other countries. Why do we have so much asthma? Why do we have so much diabetes? Why do we have so much obesity? How can the government actually incentivize health, not just pay for health care? And also, how can a healthcare system actually provide greater opportunity for people who are dealing with complementary medicine, energy medicine, all kinds of preventative things that will actually help people to cultivate health. And I think we should completely forgive the college loan debt. You have $1.5 trillion of loan debt. Now think about this. All these kids want to do is get in the game. All they want to do is get in the game. But because they're carrying this college debt, they can't get in the game. So you're keeping them from starting the business they want, you're keeping them from being a happy employer, you're keeping them from being a happy employee, and that's where money comes from. So we need to shift our entire bottom line from an economic bottom line to a humanitarian bottom line. That's what we need to do. The only other thing I want to say before I answer your questions is, I have heard people say that the things that I just said here, I've heard people say, they sound great, Marianne, but they're radical. They're common sense.
Yes.
That's how in trouble we are. That saying something like, well, first we should feed the babies. We really should feed the children. And we really should make sure that our grandchildren can breathe. And we should pay whatever debts we have. And we should try to create peace as well as be prepared for war. The fact that anybody would see that as radical shows what trouble we're in. And the fact that any of those things would be left out of the conversations that we would be having among ourselves as citizens, particularly in a presidential campaign season, also shows what trouble we're in. The current political establishment is too narrow a container. It's a superficial conversation. It doesn't go deep enough. It just speaks to symptoms, and it does not speak to cause. So we have some haters in this country. We have the bigots and the racists and the homophobes and the anti-Semites, and they're on the move. But there are far more lovers than haters. But we have to be as convicted behind our love now as some people are convicted behind our hate, because they are exerting political force. And this president, God bless him, he is not just a politician. We have to, this is another area where we have to get serious here. This man is not just a politician, he's a phenomenon. And traditional politics will not be enough to override what he is bringing to the table. We need to create a phenomenon of our own. And it's not a human being. It's all of us waking up. And nothing less than that is going to be enough to override the nefarious effects of what's coming at us. What I said to you today is simply truth. I'm not saying the other candidates are lying, they're telling the truth too. But at this time in our history, we need to do more than tell the truth. We have to do what you have to do in a court of law. You have to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Only outrageous truth-telling will defeat the outrageous lies that will be coming at us next year. So that's who I am. That's what I will do if you decide to give me the job. And I would be glad to answer your questions. I would be glad to take comments, anything that anybody has. So who'd like to go first? Yes, ma'am.
When you're elected president, what are the certain things that you do to like really solidify gun control?
Well, there are two things about gun control. First of all, on the level of the external, we need an integrated politics. So right now, too much of politics, as I said before, is focused on symptoms but not on cause. On the level of symptom, I want what most progressive Democrats want. I want universal background checks, I want to outlaw bump stocks, I want to close the loopholes, both boyfriend loopholes and gun show loopholes. I want to reinstate the ban on assault weapons. I do want mandatory buybacks, and I believe that there should be licensing. However, it cannot stop there. First of all, we have to recognize that even none of that's going to happen. I hear these candidates saying they're going to do executive orders. What are they talking about? Obama did everything that could be done within that. So let's be real here. This is why the American people must wake up, because until we are able to get the dark money out of politics, the gun manufacturers, rather than the people of the United States, will continue to dominate our gun policy. That is why one of the first things I will do to deal with gun control is to submit legislation for public funding of federal campaigns. Second thing, I would like to lower the voting age to 17. Because I think if you lower the voting age to 17, these are the kids who are dealing with this. This is their future. And I tell you, the average 17-year-old is no less perspicacious about politics today than the average 70-year-old. Yep. And given how much they have at stake, sometimes even more. Right? Now, the third thing, I want a United States Department of Peace. Like I was saying before, I want a peace academy as well as a military academy. We have to recognize, we have to take a deep look at the underlying causes of so much violence in America. Once again, this is another issue where nobody wants to look at it because we would have to be recognizing and challenging some of the underlying forces that are involved. So the United States will not be rid of the scourge of violence until we decide to be nonviolent. I want to declare peace. I want to declare peace not only internationally, I want to declare, and that doesn't mean naively internationally that you wouldn't take care of business, because you have to, but in our domestic policies, our public policies are violent. Our criminal justice policies are violent. Our criminal justice policies are as violent as the criminality that it often is seeking to punish. Our economic policies are basically violent in that they make life so unnecessarily hard for too many people. Many of our policies are essentially violent. Our main modality of foreign policy is the use of violence rather than diplomacy. There are so many ways in which we have leaned into brute force. And we also have to look in our own hearts. We have to look at our own hearts. We have to, if we're going to declare peace, we have to have a season where all of us are asking ourselves, what part do we play in the mean-spiritedness of the times in which we live? You know, we look at these kids. We have to take a deep look at these kids who picked a gun and decided to shoot their 16-year-old classmates. We don't have enough conversation about that. We don't have nearly enough conversation about that. It means that we have to look at violence. That's why we need violence prevention in the schools. We need anti-bullying in the schools. We need much more mental health in the schools. And I'm sorry, we do have to look at pharmaceuticals. Yeah. So those are the things that I would do. I would be seeking on an external level, progressive Democrats, we know those things, and we have to go deeper. But as soon as this was not an assault rifle that this boy used the other day, but most of these school shootings have occurred since we, allowed that ban to expire. If I hear one more person say, you're not going to take away our guns. First of all, nobody here is talking about taking away guns. Nobody's talking about repealing the Second Amendment. But if I hear one more person say, you're not going to take away my guns, because I'm an American mother, we're not going to let you take away our children anymore either.
That's right.
Who's next? Yes, ma'am.
Do you think maybe they decided to put that law into effect of corporations or people too, but as you say, there's no conscience there?
Well, it's a corporatist agenda. So let's talk about this in terms of conservative, liberal, and corporate. Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. That's true. There are high-minded conservative principles. There are high-minded liberal principles. I'm definitely a lefty politically, but I see the value of high-minded conservative principles, of accountability, etc. I mean, it's kind of like, it's how I am as a mother, Remember my daughter, when she was little, Mommy, you're conservative, Mommy. I bet you thought it was the worst insult she could give me. Because I wanted to give her everything she could possibly have, and she was also to be held accountable. I mean, nobody disagrees with that. But this new authoritarian corporatism is something different. It's soulless. And we now have a corporatist Supreme Court. This is why Supreme Court just the other day sent back to the states the issue of gerrymandering. They have argued against labor unions. I mean, we have a problem on our hands. And I say Roe v. Wade is probably 50-50.
Yeah.
So, but there is so much we can do as long as the people are awake. There's nothing that we have to fear as long as enough of us vote. There's nothing we have to fear, because when you look at the consciousness of the American people, the consciousness of the American people were a little left of center. Consciousness of the American people on issue after issue, that's not where the problem lies. But too many people do not pour their consciousness into the public sphere. Now, the problem is, over the last few decades, and this is how I began today, we let this happen. It's not enough that your government only hears from you every 2 years or every 4 years, when they're hearing from corporate lobbyists every single hour of every single day. So what happened is, decades ago, it started becoming so much about the money and so much about the power and so divorced from what's real and important to us in our hearts, that more and more of the best thinkers in America just divorced from politics, disengaged. But the more the best thinkers disengaged, the more toxic it became. The more toxic it was, the more heart-centered people just didn't want anything to do with it, which meant it got more toxic, which meant more cool people and get disengaged, which meant it got more toxic until we woke up one day and saw that Donald Trump was president. That makes sense? So there's been an awakening. People know we have to go back into this, but we don't want to go back as it is, because we know that it is the problem. Gandhi said the end is inherent in the means. And as someone running for president, I also see the resistance of the system to allowing in new blood. Resistance of the system to allowing in new ideas. It's very incestuous, it's an established, it's a political elite.
Oh yeah, they would
It's a
have
campaign industrial complex.
Absolutely.
And they come down on your heart if they see you gaining popularity and they don't want you on that stage. So they'll say anything, do anything. Next thing you know, you're a crystal wacko lady. It's anti-science, anti-medicine, which we laugh at, but it did its intended.
That's right.
Could be destructive.
Pardon?
Yeah, to be destructive.
Yeah, to make just enough people go, well, we can't have her. I mean, she's wacko. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I can hear microphone. Tamara Bruno. I am an entrepreneur here locally. I actually own a DoD construction contracting. I can trust there's tons of waste that can go. I'm sitting here with my muddy work boots coming from one of those sites. My question is for business owners. I also, over the last couple of years, have heavily invested in industrial hemp processing, research and development, because I too saw, obviously, climate change mother of three. I see the writing on the wall, we need to do better. We have been working since the 2018 Farm Bill came out to build that business, work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to stimulate an industrial hemp economy. We know industrial hemp, particularly fiber hemp, textile industries. There are so many different things that we are able to use the fiber, the bast, the seed, everything out of the plant. We're having a hard time as business owners in a new industry, in a green industry. We can't get the government to hear us. We have one little ear here, but we cannot seem to get any legs behind it.
You know, George Washington agreed with you.
Absolutely, and the things, I have another company, I have an apparel company, and we have switched to making our own bras. We're using a hemp blended fabric now, so that I can use another successful company that I own in order to promote a commodity crop for the state of Iowa. We cannot get the state of Iowa to turn the corner. We have farmers failing left and right. We have farms going out of business every day in this state, and we cannot get the politicians on board. One, support the entrepreneurs who are willing to invest their hard-earned money from other businesses into creating this corporate culture of moral and ethical responsibility. I've built a lot of things for the Department of Defense. Are they all fantastic projects? Absolutely not. 80% of them are well spent. I would like to take my money and invest it
That's right.
in something better.
That's right.
What my question for you is, if you are elected president, and even if you are not elected president, how are you going to support that new green moral economy? And what can business owners like myself do to help you?
You know, it's interesting. Everything that you talked about, partly because I'm running for president, and partly because I've been interested in this stuff. I didn't just wake up one day not interested in this stuff and say, let's run for president. I understood everything that you just said. But there are probably some people here who heard some of what you just said for the first time. That's how we heal. We heal one aha at a time. So there are people who, I don't know, I've heard this thing about hemp and how hemp and the legalization of marijuana and how that's connected, legalization of hemp, et cetera, and investing in hemp, who, let's say you see something in the newspaper tomorrow or the next day, that if you had not spoken, you probably would have ignored it. But because you were here, you go, oh, that's what that lady was talking about. This is what politics should be.
Absolutely.
This is what politics should be, where we sit and we talk about these things. Not just oppositional, rah, rah, blah, blah. This is where we all need to become more enlightened. The reason they're able to get away with that is because they're not getting any pushback from people. That's why there will not be a new kind of leadership that we really need until if you want an awakened leadership, there has to be an awakened constituency first. The people have to awaken in order to awaken the leadership, and don't expect the sleeping political establishment to provide the awakened political leadership. Not that the individuals wouldn't like to go there, but I've talked that they're like stuck within it. Does that make sense? And so absolutely we need to. Absolutely. Not only in terms of supporting you as a small business, because if you put all the money, the jobs created by big corporations, and then the jobs created by small business creates just underneath, in terms of job creation, just a little bit less than big corporations do. An America that's honestly interested in a moral economy and a prosperous economy in the future would do what you're saying.
Small businesses are the ones that are going to have to lead the green
Absolutely,
economy.
and the issue of
We
health.
can't get large businesses to do it. They're the ones trying to shut our doors.
Of course they are. Of course they are. And yet the government is giving all the tax breaks to them rather than to you.
Absolutely.
But they're
Well,
doing,
that's a corporatist establishment.
they're doing the same thing to the small farmer.
Absolutely.
Well, that's what agribusiness did.
Absolutely.
I mean, before, once again, it all started in the 80s. Before the 1980s, the farmer didn't have a great crop, goes to the bank says, that's okay. It's okay, you know, we'll carry it over till next year, you'll have a better crop next year. And there was enough diversification, et cetera, that there was a good chance the farmer would. But then once the banks became in cahoots with the agribusiness, the banks withheld the loans, wouldn't carry over the loan as a way of starting to squeeze the farmers to give into the big corporatization of agriculture.
And they've killed our economy.
And it killed the economy, and what it's doing to the topsoil, what it's doing to the crops, what it's doing to the food. And it's heartbreaking how many of the farmers who simply don't have a historical memory of all this happened. There are so many ways in which this country enables and protects its abusers.
Absolutely.
So true.
So how do we get small business owners behind you?
Well, I think some small business owners are behind me.
We are.
I don't think it's a matter of small business. It's a matter of people with my particular candidacy. I think my candidacy has a very broad, I can't tell you how many Republicans say they would vote for me. I believe there are millions of Trump supporters who, they voted for him, but they're at least disturbed. But if all you're going to do is bash Trump, that scolds them, makes them feel shame. That's not going to make them. They want to feel inspired. The problem for someone like myself has to do with the DNC establishment not wanting me up there. As someone, I see the gentleman in the Yang T-shirt. Andrew was able to break through. Andrew was a good friend of mine. Andrew is, he was an outsider candidate, but was able to break through. But they didn't start all that stuff about, like they did with me. But I'm still in the race, and it's interesting. Because you're the voters of Iowa. It's really not up to the DNC. It's actually up to you.
Good for you.
It's actually up to you. Thank you. So as long as people donate, if you feel that I should be in this race, if you feel that this is a candidacy should exist, I hope that you will help me. If you feel moved, I hope you will volunteer. I hope that you will tell your friends. I hope you will tag me on social media. I hope you will donate. I hope you will do the thing I don't need to tell you. You're Iowa voters. You know what to do. Does that make sense? Because I agree with you entirely about him. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Thank you. First, thank you for coming to Iowa, and thank you just for your run for president. It's been very inspiring to see.
Thank you.
I want to turn to foreign policy.
Okay.
Particularly what's been top of mind for me this week has been the term events in Bolivia.
Yeah.
I guess to that point, first, would you agree with Bernie Sanders that what has transpired is a coup? And more to that point, what steps would you take as president, particularly in regards to the AOS and CIA, to prevent them from toppling popular movements, particularly in South America, too?
Well, I'm not under the impression that the CIA did what happened to Vietnam. So you under the impression that the CIA did that?
Well, they traditionally have a history of toppling.
Well, we certainly with the Yen Day, et cetera. I'm not saying that the United States has clean hands when it comes to Latin America. I'm not saying that at all. However, in this particular case of Evo Morales in Bolivia, I don't think we should jump to the conclusion that it was the United States. And I don't say that naively. Maybe there's something. I haven't seen any evidence that made me think that. They have their own military issue. Remember, he had appointed those guys then did him in. They have enough dirty hands in Latin America in their own country that it wasn't necessarily us. But it's horrifying the way our president acted like, well, it's good they did that. The United States should never be supporting a military coup. Bernie Sanders is right. Now, is it a completely black and white situation? No, it's not, because there were questionable issues with those elections, definitely. But to be honest, that's not the United States business. And what the United States should be doing is supporting. Absolutely, they need, and we should be supporting free elections, so that they have a democratically elected next leader. Because right now it has been a military coup. It's not even a matter of an opinion whether it was a military coup. It was a military coup. And so this is one of many areas. You talked about the history of such people as Allende is a perfect example in Chile. We have some very dirty hands in terms of Latin America. You might remember in the first debate where I mentioned that. And I tell you, it's interesting because I was up there on the debate stage, and when I said, I don't remember any of you guys saying anything about American foreign policy in Latin America. You should see how they jumped. Did you just say that? Yeah, I said it. I'll say it again. And of course, it's no joking matter when you not only, what we did to Allende in Chile, it's the same as what we did to Iran.
Right.
I mean, Iran, we were the ones who put the Shah there. We were the one who overturned the democratically elected leader of Iran, and his sin was that he had said that the Iranian oil should belong to the Iranians rather than to British Petroleum. So this is the way the United States has acted. This is what's got to stop. And it's occurring so in Latin America, when you look at what's happening today, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and the horrible environmental crisis, humanitarian crisis there, the United States foreign policy, I had the honor of meeting the Dalai Lama, and he said to me, the people of the world do not see the United States as a champion of democracy. The one that is the most egregious at the moment has to do with our support of our aerial support for the war in Yemen. This is another example where Bernie was part of he helped lead the effort to override that policy, and then Trump vetoed it and they couldn't override his veto. But every American should be very aware of what's going on here. For the sake of $360 billion in arms sale, you've probably seen the picture of the president in the Oval Office, sitting there with that murderous crown prince of Saudi Arabia. We know what he did to Khashoggi. And he's sitting there with this big poster board showing us all these wonderful airplanes and bombers that we're selling for $360 billion. Now, it used to be that we used to sell billions of dollars in military aid to Saudi Arabia. And people would say, well, should we be doing that? Because, they're not always so great. People went, it doesn't matter if they don't use it anyway. They just like to have it. This crown prince has decided he wants to use it. And he's prosecuting a war against Yemen. Now, we are giving aerial support to that war. They couldn't be prosecuting without our aerial support. Tens of thousands of Yemenis have been starved, including children, who are all over, whose pictures are all over the internet. Now, two things I want to say about that. Number one, the problem in my mind is not just that this is happening, but that we're not even talking about it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We're not even talking about it. Why isn't this on the news every night?
Right.
Right? And the second thing that we have to realize is when Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, who also said today that the United States will no longer say that the settlements on the West Bank are against international law.
Yeah.
Say Netanyahu and Trump are like Erdogan and their peas in a pod. But we have, as part of our situation where people had asked Mike Pompeo, how could we be giving aerial support to a genocidal war? This is America. This is America. We don't do that. Our grandparents would be rolling over in their graves. This is genocide. We don't do that. You know what Mike Pompeo responded? He said, well, sometimes you can have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. No, you can't. It means you have no values. So what that means is that that's what it is. Whatever increases short-term profits for corporations, even if people are going to die,
Morally bankrupt.
even if there's genocide, even if we're going to topple a democratically elected government, and we say we stand for democracy, it's not going to stop until we stage the intervention.
We're allowing nuclear technology to go over there now.
Yes, yes,
To Saudi Arabia.
that's right.
That madman.
Is it? I know. I read that. One that is the one that just blows my mind is that the United States Air Force has ordered 100 airplanes called the B-21 Raiders. Has anybody read about the B-21 Raider? No. Listen to this one. The B-21 Raider, we've ordered 100 of them. But please remember what I said, it's your money. Each B-21 Raider costs $560 million. But listen about this plane. It drops conventional bombs, which, bombers do drop bombs. But it doesn't just drop conventional bombs. It also drops nuclear bombs. So, you tell me, why do we need 100 airplanes that drop nuclear bombs? You drop 5 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. You drop 10 of those, it's over for the species. And the smallest nukes that exist on the planet today make Nagasaki and Hiroshima look like a pinprick.
Right.
So do you think that 100 of those B-21 raiders is for our national security? Once again, are we fools? Because we're being played for them. And Tulsi Gabbard and I are the only people who even mention the dominance of the national security. And it's not an accident. It's not an accident that she and I are the ones who have been smeared. So when it comes to our foreign policy, it is as dirty as we have dirty hands. And that's one of the things about this campaign I found amazing, is how it's not even a conversation. It's radical to bring it up. Where do we think the world's going to be? You know, for those of you, I hope you'll all sign my mailing list. The blog I wrote today, if you look at Marianne 2020, and it will be the letter I sent out tomorrow. You know, they do war games. We should also do peace games. You know, they have these very sophisticated technology, and they say, if this happens, how do we militarily respond? We should say that our goal, you know, one of the things I've always been so impressed by is the cathedrals, the great cathedrals of Europe. And you also see this with St. John the Divine in New York. The thing about the great cathedrals of Europe is that they took hundreds of years to build. So people who were doing the stone cutting, and people who were doing the bricklaying, and people who were doing the pictures, and the amazing things they did, knew that they would not live to see the final results. Isn't that amazing? A meaningful life is not lived just for yourself, and no generation should just live for itself. We should make as our goal, JFK said, if mankind does not put an end to war, war will put an end to mankind. So we should have peace games where our goal is that at the end of this century, war will be well on its way to being a memory. That should be our goal. That should be our goal. And so peace games means that we're doing the same technology. Where do we need to deal with environmental issues here? Whether we need food issues here, etc. Because even on the environmental things, if we don't take radical action in the next 12 years, we could have a massive level of social collapse within 20 years. We could have whole swaths of countries and continents that are uninhabitable because of the heat. If it's uninhabitable because of the heat, that means you can't grow food there. Massive food shortages, economic collapse, and possibly hundreds of millions of climate refugees. That's why these young people talk like, seriously, you almost think they're joking, and you realize they're not joking. I used to just hear the vegans, you know, because they've been saying it for a long time about reducing population, etc. I spent most of my adult life in California, so that I'm used to. Now young people aren't saying it just because of that. And you almost think like, this is serious, they're serious. Because they're actually looking and wondering, should I bring a child in? This is abnormal, ladies and gentlemen, this is not normal. We have moved from dysfunctional to malfunctional. And so we need new thinking. This is the 21st century. The 21st century is a different mindset than the 20th century. And these young people are not 20th century people. What year were you born, may I ask?
2005.
2005? She said she wasn't even born in the 20th century. And her life should not be burdened by the effects of bad thinking in the 20th century. And in every area, we are a regenerative people. The American people are not the problem. The American people, it's not right on Wednesday, we'll change it by Saturday. But the political establishment is this dinosaur of entrenched because of all the money and all the power. And the only thing that's going to change that is if we get it.
Stop fossil
Thank you all for introducing Diana for my campaign, and I just want to say, like I said before, it's a real honor, a real privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank you.